Friday Night Racing
on Off the Ball.
Brought to you by Horse Racing Ireland. Love every racing moment. Visit hri.ie.
And you are very welcome along to this week's edition of Friday Night Racing. It's Jerry Gilroy and Johnny Ward with you every Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock across OTB's social channels. The best place to get us these days, of course, is on the OTB Sports app. Johnny Ward, good afternoon to you. How are you?
Good afternoon, Jer. How are you?
Yeah, this is the big weekend of the year that we've been counting down for months and months, Longines Champions Weekend.
It is the showpiece rather of the flat in Ireland, and not still in its infancy. This kind of concept, I suppose, of putting these two meetings together and having Leopardstown and the Curragh, I suppose, just attract crowds for flat meetings, get the best of the best together. And this year doesn't, let us down, apart from the obvious fact that, obviously there's not going to be a crowd there. But the racing is very good. I think the weather has been pretty excellent as well for the last few days. Beautiful ground at both tracks, I think, is pretty much assured. Despite the pandemic, we do have some runners from Britain and even from France. So effectively, nearly everything's in place, and it's going to be a cracking weekend. OK, well, we'll preview some of the races a little bit later on in a bit more detail with Johnny. But in the meantime, I'm delighted to say that we have the legend that is Dermot Weld with us to talk to us on Friday Night Racing. Dermot, good afternoon to you. How are you getting on?
Afternoon to both of you. Getting on good, I'm glad to say.
How excited are you for what's about to come for the weekend?
Listen, Champions Weekend is always an excellent weekend, and it's the high point of the flat season in Ireland.
Dermot, you've obviously been around the world, had incredible success all around the world. Do you still feel a little frisson of excitement ahead of big races like what we're about to have over the next 2 days?
Yeah, definitely. And of course, I have added interest in Saturday, having bred Gaiath, the favourite for the Champion Stakes.
And as a matter of interest, is that the thing that keeps you going at this point, where it's the actual race day itself?
No, it's the work from morning till night, 7 days a week, and tell you, you just got to have the desire to do it.
So you have to love it?
You do.
When you were a kid growing up, did you love it? Was that straight away?
Yeah, I suppose I was. Yeah, most definitely. I was always very interested, and I learned very quickly that you didn't achieve anything without hard work.
Because you're born into racing, and was there ever any point where you were like you had to get shooed out to go and do the work, or were you kind of...
well, look, I've done many things, I've qualified as a veterinary surgeon, I've written a book that got to be number 5 in the non-fiction list.
So that was... It's not just racing, there's a 360...
Yeah, I look as life in general.
And just Gaiath, Dermot, could you just tell us about that as well, the story behind... He's basically the best horse in Europe, if not the world at the moment, and the story behind breeding him.
Yeah, he's the highest rated horse in the world, so it's a great honour. We've got 6 mares in Springbank, which is a small farm there at the back of the Curragh race course. And Mark Weld, my eldest son, he manages it. And I bought a filly a number of years ago from a mother called Count Shannon. She was an Indian Ridge filly that wasn't sold at the yearling sales, and she did very well for us. Count Shannon, as you may or may not know, is a lake in the Cumberland Mountains, and she won 5 for me. She was champion older mare of Ireland, and then fast forward, one of her first progeny was Nighttime, who was from the first crop of Galileo, who won the 1,000 guineas, owned by my mother, ridden by Pat Smullen. And of course, she went on now. We have her at stud on the farm, and she's the dam of Gaiath.
It's remarkable the way that, you can trace it back to the dam of Nighttime. What actually attracted you to the dam of Nighttime in the first place?
What attracted to me? I was very partial to Indian Ridge. I thought he'd make a very successful broodmare sire. And that was really, we wanted to find a nice filly by Indian Ridge, and she wasn't sold in the sales, and I bought her privately.
It's I know she's obviously gone to Dubawi and so forth. She's gone to the best, but it's obviously very exciting what Nighttime might still do.
It is indeed, and it's lovely. We've 3 generations, like we have Nighttime's half sister, and we've got, as I said, progeny of Nighttime and of Count Shannon on the ground.
Is there any regret you're not training them?
Oh, look, she'd love to train him as well, but we run a commercial these are the hard facts of life, is that we run a commercial operation, and business is what we run, and that's what our farm is. That's what we run it for, is as a business.
Was it always a stud farm as well as a training operation?
Well, my mother always had a stud farm. My mother and father, especially my mother's had a stud farm. She had for many, many years, and bred many good horses, including, of course, we bred Grey Swallow, who she also part-owned, that I won the Irish Derby with, again ridden by Pat Smullen a number of years ago. And we're very fortunate in that it's on a wonderful vein of land, of limestone land, and what we've produced, group winners-wise, from 6 and 7 mares is pretty unique.
Is there anything coming from Nighttime now in the near future that we should know of her?
Well, she's got, thank God, we've got a nice cold foal by Kingman. And please God, she's now safely back and foal to Dubowie.
Lovely.
Dermot, your mum, what was her introduction to racing? How did she get into it?
Well, she was from a farm in Waterford, and my grandfather always kept horses, always kept more point-to-point horses, so it'd be more national hunt orientated, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So that's where it came from. But my late father and my mother were very successful. My father trained over 1,000 winners, Galway Plate winners, Group 1 winners, and that's where it really came from.
So he was a trainer and she ran the stud farm. It's a brilliant combination.
Yeah, true indeed. And the ethos of, hard work was very much ingrained in me.
And come here, the limestone, right? Because we've spoken about this before.
Sure.
That part of Kildare and that seam of it, it's the grass.
It's a wonderful vein of land that we're very fortunate to buy. And the strike rate of the horses, the small number of horses that we produce off that land, is phenomenal.
And what was the process there? Did you know that?
Yeah, well, look, I was always aware of how good this vein of land in Kildare is. And as I said, it's rich in limestone. It's amazing. You could drive a car over any of the fields after the wettest winter you could have, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And it runs down to a famous area called the Pollardstown Fen, which is a very, very famous area.
That's the bog.
That's correct.
Yeah.
See, it drains down to that, so you have tremendous limestone available on the surface of the land.
Like, people in the area have been driving over those bog roads for generations, cursing the bad suspension in their cars. And all the time, it's a secret weapon for some of the best racehorse trainers in the world. I had no idea. That's amazing.
There you are.
So the topography and the geography...
Oh, yeah, no, exactly. Like, there's certain counties in Ireland have a far better ratio of breeding horses than other counties.
And look, obviously that helps, right? The raw materials are hugely important. Yeah. Your dad's training, like, are you an inheritor of his style of training?
Definitely, yeah, I'd have to say very definitely. I would indeed. I like to have patience with the way I develop and bring horses on. I'm not interested really in mad rush and in breeze-ups and things like that. I like to take my time. I like to let horses tell me when they're ready to run.
Does the game allow you, as you get older, as we all get older, does the game allow that anymore?
Not as easy. Totally agree with you. No, very good question, Johnny. No, not as easy, because everybody wants a winner yesterday, if you know what I mean.
As you look at, say, John Knox, like, whose patience personified, and it's kind of, I guess, not fashionable to be patient.
Look, it's a change of world, and you've got to change with it, and we've changed. Look at, I produced a number of very nice 2-year-old winners this year, and that's it. You've got to get after them a lot quicker than we used to.
And how did you find coming out of lockdown? Because your form seems to have just gradually gotten better and better as the season's gone on.
Yeah, I suppose the first month of lockdown, the standard in Ireland was extremely high, and some horses from some trainers were probably just that bit fitter than mine. Whereas, which would equate to March, April. I never win a lot of races in March, April, if you know what I mean. The majority of my wins always come in the second part of the year. I think September, October is always the strength of my winnings. But my attitude is, equally in the last few years, that's when, with the exception of the classics, That's when the big flat races are run. You've got the Irish Champions Weekend, the English Champions Weekend, the Arc, the Breeders' Cup, Japan Cup, all the way through, if you know what I mean. So the big racing really starts at the end of August.
Yeah, and it turned out you actually had quite a nice bunch of horses this year as well.
Yeah, I'm happy we have a smaller team by design. We don't have the numbers of some of the other yards, and that probably hasn't seeped through to many people, that we don't have the numbers of horses, but I'm very happy with what we've got.
When you said earlier you let the horse tell you, how does that process work? Where do they tell you?
They tell you many ways. They tell you on the gallops, they tell you in their boxes in the evening how they're eating or not eating, how they're adapting to their work, and basically how they adapt to stress.
And how, so in terms of being an inheritor of your dad's style, what would you characterise that style as? Like, how often would you work your horses hard, and how close to a race? I'd
say that's kind of, every trainer would have his own way of doing it. You know, there's many roads still lead to the same end result. So there's different ways of getting there, if you know what I mean.
And do you do it different for different horses, or is there
Definitely.
like... Okay.
No. Every horse is an individual, and that's a very, very vital point to make. Every horse is an individual. It's like every player on a football team. You know, they're all humans, we're all different. You know what I mean? It's Alex Ferguson and I had numerous conversations about this, about getting the best out of a horse and the best out of a player. And it's man management, as simple as that.
When you say man management, like how important, like especially when you have a bigger operation, how hard is it to know the horse individually, mentally and physically?
Well, this is why it's very hard work, because it's a 7-day-week job. And you've got to, and that's why I actually enjoy more now training a smaller team of horses, because it suits my way of training better. It's easier for me now training a smaller select team.
Yeah, and is it, it's obviously, every year is different. You're going to get a 2-year-old next year that was different to something you had. You know, I guess that's what energizes you, because the game is always evolving as well.
Yeah, it evolves all the time, and you're looking for the next big horse. I've been fortunate. Look, I've trained, 25 classic winners. You're looking for the next classic horse.
Do you think you have one at the moment?
It's early days to say yet. It's early days. We'll know more in a couple of weeks' time when some more of the Group 2-year-old races are run. Then we'll have a better idea after races like the Beresfords and some of those races.
In those conversations with Alex Ferguson, are you picking his brains as well to see if there's anything you can learn?
It'll be a cross section of great discussion and interest, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
He actually wrote the foreword for my book.
So what are you asking him about? What are you trying to get insight into?
You're trying to see how he gets the best out of his different players. Obviously some very, very talented guys, and how he is able to get consistency out of them. How he gets them to do what he wants them to do. And the main thing is consistency. How does he get consistency throughout a tough English season, you know?
Yeah.
There's surely still time for you to train a horse from, is there?
We're good friends.
You want to keep it that way, it's fair enough. And come here, are there other people like that you've sought out at various stages and gone?
I suppose there are, but he was a very interesting one. You'd appreciate that.
Yeah, totally. I'm always interested in somebody who reaches the peak of their own sport. Like sport, it's a business. It's also a game. You know, you're trying to win. There's an outcome where there is a high and a low.
It's a combination of factors.
Yeah, but when you reach the very top, there are very few people who you can actually have conversations with.
True.
And learn from. And the only way to get better is to continuously learn. So I'm always interested in, like, how do you...
Well, in training these race horses, trust me on this one, you learn every day. And that's one of the interesting things, is there'll be something different, something fresh every day, or something you realise that you didn't do right, usually. A little mistake, you're not going to talk to people about it, but you know yourself, I could have done that a little bit better, or I can train this horse slightly different, or he needs a little bit more work, he needs a bit less work. You learn by your own mistakes.
That's the experience of actually going through each individual horse and spending that time with them.
True.
Do you change as a trainer then as a result of that?
Yeah, you do. You do. I've changed. I don't train the same as I did when I started training many years ago, if you know what I mean. The whole thing has changed, but you've got to be able to rotate and change with the times.
That's interesting. How would you kind of characterise those changes?
Those changes, Johnny kind of briefly mentioned there, you're nowadays expected to deliver much quicker results than we were a number of years ago. So there's a bit more pressure goes on in different areas to get results.
So you try and accelerate the pace at which...
I suppose you do, yes, you do, quite honest with you.
Yeah. And
at the same time stick to your ethos of the way you like to train. That's why I say, as Johnny said, the first few weeks when we started back after the virus, I was one of the slowest to get going. But that equates to kind of March, April, normally, when I'd never be going I'd always be one of the last to get going, because I would want my horses, I want them to last all the way to November, you see.
In the first few seasons when you were young and a young trainer, was that a frustration? Was that a period of tension every year in March, April, going, what's going on?
In those days, I suppose I did get going a bit earlier than I do now, maybe. I don't know. Not really, because I always saw the big picture. I always saw you brought your horse, you developed each horse. You tried to develop each horse to its maximum, be it a group horse, be it an ordinary horse. You try and get the best out of each horse.
You were definitely a man for a challenge, though, in terms of, I know maybe Vincent O'Brien and Paddy Mullins travelled horses when others didn't, but you obviously targeted races that they said you couldn't win.
Well, the biggest problem I faced in my early days was Ireland. See, apart from having the land, we have wonderful people in this country that we've got to be very proud of in our industry. And I've no doubt that the best personnel in the horse business in the world are based in this little island that we have. And I've been one of the ones that have proven that, if you know what I mean. So I had to take on in the early days Vincent O'Brien and Paddy Prendergast, who were two of the greatest trainers of all times. And I realised very quickly, having been a vet and having been around the world myself and having been champion amateur rider 3 times of Ireland, and in those days then I rode winners in France, I rode a winner in South Africa, I rode a winner in America. And I realised when I went to these countries, I got the idea that the opposition, training-wise, and indeed riding-wise in many cases, wasn't as good as Ireland. So if I could travel a horse to these countries, which wasn't easy, I can tell you, and nobody had done it, other than my father was the very first when he ran a very good horse called Farney Fox in the Washington International of 1963. I think he was the first to run in America.
What were the logistics of that in those days?
For my late father to bring Farney Fox to America, they flew out of Shannon, I know that, into, I forget, it wasn't Dulles, I suppose, Washington, D.C. And actually he ran a very, very good race. Hard to believe that year there were 2 Russian runners in the race.
Wow.
Yeah. And, yeah,
63.
2 Russian. And it was around the
Cold War almost.
Yeah, it was 63. It was round about, Michael O'Hare did the commentary because he stayed over then to do the commentary on John F. Kennedy's funeral.
Wow.
And there were 2 Russian runners in the race. There was a Japanese runners, because I remember the late Joe Malone was the name of the man that travelled Farney Fox out. And he was belonged to the Donnelly family from Dundalk. And T.P. Burns rode him, and he ran an excellent race. Trip was a little bit tight, a little bit sharp for him, Laurel Park. But they had 2 Russian runners and a Japanese runner in the race that year.
You have amazing clarity about it.
Oh, it was just a very special event, if you know what I mean. And I was very proud of my father that he would be the first Irish trainer to do it.
And how did you end up riding in South Africa?
Well, sorry, hang on. Were you on that trip then?
No, I was at school.
Okay, right.
Yeah. How did you end up in South Africa riding?
Well, when I qualified as a vet, I went to work. I went around the world. I worked in Australia, worked in America. I worked my passage. And I worked in South Africa as a vet. Got a contact to go there, and I worked in a place very close to a racetrack called Pietermaritzburg. And they were trying to start jump racing in South Africa. And I naturally rode a horse schooling there, and he jumped very well. And they asked me would I come back out next spring to ride in this new big sponsored they called it steeplechase, but it was really a hurl race. And I always said it was very similar to a Galway hurl. That was the level you wanted, if you know what I mean. It was kind of they considered it a grade 1 hurl race. I thought it was kind of a grade 1 handicap. But the horse I was going out to ride and had written schooling, he went lame. And as they brought me out, I got on another horse, not an outsider, but I think he was a 10-to-1 shot called Poplin. And duly won on him.
And how much did travelling, because obviously that would have been unusual for somebody at that time, how much did that benefit your training down the line?
I'd say hugely, because it opened my mind. I never saw the world as being small. I always saw the world as much more easier to win around the world than to win in Ireland. And it was just a matter of getting to these places. And that's why we were the first to go to Hong Kong when I brought 2 horses there to their first international meeting. And one won and the other was second. Michael Canaan rode both of them. Additional Risk won the Hong Kong Bowl. And a horse called Pruton Manor won the was second in the Hong Kong Vase. Excuse me.
The audacity of your dad in the 60s to even think about bringing a horse to America, that's like, you know, when you inject that into the hard work, that's a brilliant thing to pass on to your kids.
Yeah, it was. He was a wonderful father, and he was a very talented trainer.
As a matter of interest, why did you feel the need or the desire to go and become a vet when you kind of had...
I suppose I was encouraged by my mother and father, because being a racehorse trainer is a very precarious business, I can tell you. It's not to be recommended.
How much did the veterinary side of it really help you down the years then?
I would say in the early days it was huge. Nowadays everything is online. Everybody knows everything now, for example, about ulcers and treatment for ulcers. And in the early days, people didn't even talk about ulceration in horses, if you know what I mean. But I was always pretty well aware of those sort of things. One little story. I was always Vintage Crop, for example, the horse that won our first Melbourne Cup. He was a very delicate individual, and I always got the idea that he possibly suffered from ulcers. And it was before the time that we could scope horses. This was 1993 to any great extent for ulcers. So I put him on Zantac, which was a human preparation for ulcers. And he raced on Zantac, and it had a marked effect on him. So in some little ways, I was ahead of the posse that way. But nowadays, everybody is aware of the correct treatment for ulcers, and so it goes.
So when you look at the trainers who've been around, yourself, Jim Bulger, Kevin Prendergast, John Ox, you've all these new boys coming up, and you have to keep up with the pace.
Oh, sure. That's what I say. You've got to evolve with the times, and we have. And I'm very fortunate, very happy with the year we're having, very happy with the 2-year-olds coming forward. Very happy with my staff, and yeah. That's the only difference. I think we've got to work a lot harder now than we did in those early days.
The difference in all of the backgrounds of the trainers that Johnny has spoken there about, you can see that there's no one path to becoming a great trainer. Do you think, though, that there is some consistency that you share with your contemporaries and your rivals?
I'm quite sure there's a work ethic that extends across to all trainers, and that is one very, very common denominator.
How competitive is it? Because you know, every day you're sending stuff out desperate to win.
Sure. Oh, it's Ireland. This is a cliche that everybody has heard before, but we are the most competitive racing country in the world. There's nowhere, and I've been to most racing centres around the world and been fortunate to train winners on 4 continents, but there's nowhere as competitive as Ireland, I can assure you of that. And
is the relationship with the other trainers fairly straightforward, or...?
I've always found it excellent, to be quite honest.
Yeah, because, you know, again, like...
Very supportive. I've always found them very supportive, very helpful, and I'm very proud to be asked that question and to reply to it. I've been very, very... I think we're very fortunate with the friendship we have, and yet the way we take each other on day in, day out. That's
the thing, isn't it? Because that rivalry has to be there as well to drive you on.
Yes, there is, but I suppose, like anything in life, you're judged very quickly the sort of person you are.
Yeah.
And I've been very fortunate, as I said, that I respect all my opposition, but I'm very friendly with each and every one of them.
The other thing that I'm always really interested in, the jockeys who come into us on Friday afternoons, you know, we look at their winning percentage, and most of the time that they do their job, they get defeated. And it's the same with trainers. Like, most of the time, you don't actually win. Because you're from a training background and because you've seen the highs and lows, were you able to deal with that straight away?
I think you've got to have confidence in your own ability. And it's all about confidence and your ability to transfer that confidence to your jockeys and to your horse. You see, I was very fortunate. Over a 30-year period, I only had 2 jockeys. I had Michael Kinane and Pat Smullen. And they were champion jockeys nearly every year when they rode for me.
That's not bad.
So there was a 31 year with 2 riders.
I'm always, again, the bit where you're talking about confidence, sometimes it's a trick we have to play with ourselves to convince ourselves that we're confident. You know, you can't tell somebody to be confident because they actually have to believe it.
No, you learn. It's hard to put that into words. You know, something that you learn, I suppose, with success, to be quite honest with you.
And were there ever times along the way where you had a brief fallow period and you lost that confidence and had to try and dig deep to find it?
No, I don't think so. I've always had the belief in my own confidence, my own belief in my own ability. You have to have that. You must believe in your own ability.
And did you have that as a 22-year-old, as a trainer starting out?
I had it as a 16-year-old. I rode my first winner in Galway on Ticonderoga when I was 15 of the big amateur handicap.
Yeah, and in fairness as well, your staff have been, you know, when you look at your staff down the years, you know, even the riders that aren't Smullen or Kinane, been very, very loyal to you, and you've been pretty loyal to your staff, I'd argue, as well.
Yes, I believe loyalty is vital. I've learned that from my father, and I think we've always been exceptionally loyal. And you build, that's one of the ways that you build a team. Like, training a horse is, a big number of horses, is a team effort. It's not a one-man show. It's a team effort, and everybody is important.
Will you talk to us a bit about Pat Smullen? Obviously, you know, he's done incredible work at a very difficult point in his life to raise so much money for cancer research.
Yes, indeed.
And, you know, I think everybody will kind of always look back on that race at the Curragh as the rebirth of the new Curragh in many ways.
True indeed. It was a wonderful day. It was a day I definitely thoroughly enjoyed. I remember looking at the huge crowd that was present that day, how well actually the Curragh looked, and the stand looked magnificent, and what Pat was achieving was phenomenal.
Do you think you guys actually fully appreciate the cultural significance of the sport sometimes when you're in it?
Oh, I think we do. I think we do. Definitely, yes.
And do you feel that you know, like you are part of, you're in the vanguard of a part of Irish industry that is globally recognised and actually...
Oh, I do. I'm fully aware of that, and I promote it to the best I can, not only by how my horses perform around the world, and I'm very proud of when, going back years ago, watching the Irish flag being flown when I won 2 Melbourne Cups, or when I won the first of the Triple Crown races in America. The Belmont would go and go to hear the Irish national anthem being played, or be it in Hong Kong or Dubai or wherever we happen to win major races. I'm very, very much aware of that.
Just on that, Ger, I mean, when I'm not into racing all that long, but my first Champion Stakes would have been when, my first Champion Stakes that I was at was when Falbrav beat High Chaparral. But when High Chaparral, you know, ran against Johar in the dead heat in the Breeders' Cup, and I was only getting into racing, certainly, Dermot, for me, it's something that we should kind of latch onto in terms of that patriotism, that you want the Irish horse to do well when they're abroad.
Most definitely. And we must remember that it's the largest rural industry in Ireland. There's 28,000 people employed directly or indirectly in the horse industry in Ireland. It is very much, it may be a sport, but it's a blooming industry, first and foremost.
The audacity of your dad to travel to Washington for that time, the audacity to travel to Australia with horses, and Johnny asked about the logistics of the trip. Did Vintage Crop lose a load of weight heading down to Australia?
He would have lost a lot in the travel. He would have lost probably 20 kilos. Yeah, he would have, and it took us a couple of weeks just to get him back. It was only literally in the last little bit of work he did before the race down there that I was happy with him.
Is that just pure luck, or is it just the stars aligned, or what is it?
And you make your own luck in this game.
Yeah, I don't know. Was that Vintage Crops Melbourne Cup? Where does that rank versus Harazand, for example?
I suppose Harazand was my greatest achievement personally for myself. Winning the first Melbourne Cup with Vintage Crop at the time was my biggest achievement as a racehorse trainer, because everybody said it couldn't be done, be it in Europe or indeed in Australia. Because it was unheard of to bring a horse in those days from the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere and win the Melbourne Cup. You just didn't do it.
So the week before, when he's getting the weight back and the work hasn't quite come right yet, what's your own thought process at that point?
Well, it's a balancing act to try and get him back, to try and get him eating, to try and build his confidence, and to try and to get him to acclimatise and just get to settle into the new environment. And, you know, he was a very talented horse, but he had his moments. He wasn't the greatest of feeders. He was a worrier, hence the ulcers. He'd back problems, but he had amazing talent. And he'd great courage. He'd wonderful courage.
And before the last bit of good work that he does, which is the last bit of work, was there doubt creeping in at that point, and you thinking, actually, maybe they were right, maybe this can't be done?
You can't be letting doubts creep in. You must be positive always. When you've gone around the world that far, you can't be thinking negative. You've got to be positive. You've got to believe you can do this.
And so when you see that last bit of work and the weight is back on, that must be a surge of confidence for everybody going, actually, we're going to...
It was, yeah, no, I was quietly confident before he won. And I just knew we had him just the way we wanted. We had him up right for the day. And it was a huge thing for Ireland at that time, because we were going through a very difficult time in the late 80s, early 90s, with employment, with finances, and it was a major achievement for our country to come and go to Australia and win their biggest race at that given time.
I remember reading Michael Clore's book, I don't know, the Legends of the Turf or whatever it's called, but it's quite a few years ago now, but your ambition at that time was to win a race in South Africa. So are you going to achieve that?
I don't know. That's getting to South Africa has proven very, very difficult. That's why nobody's been there. African horse sickness is the problem.
What's that about then?
African horse sickness is a disease that's carried by the tsetse fly, and it's a fatal disease of horses that is still prevalent in that part of the world.
Right.
So until that's sorted out, it's not really possible.
And with all that, with the incredible body of work that you put together, what is it that gets you up every morning and makes you feel excited?
The desire for the next winner.
And that was cultivated, I guess, at the knee of your mum and dad as a kid.
It did. Yeah, we've exactly. It was the will to win, the will to go forward, the enjoyment of what we do, the achievements, the success, the sharing of that success, all comes together.
One last one from me, Dermot. In terms of where we are at the moment, where the industry is at the moment, what do you think, and what are the specific challenges you think facing racing at the moment?
I think that racing is at an excellent area at the moment, but I think we're facing a lot of challenges. But just like our country with the virus is facing serious challenges, and having huge respect for all the people that have lost loved ones, we've got to be very, very aware of that. But I believe the protocols in horse racing, they're the strictest of any sport. You know, we've got social distancing taking place at race courses, face mask coverings. They're mandatory both inside and outside. And please God, we'll get a vaccine very soon and we'll be back the way we should be.
Yeah. Do you just in relation to your jockeys as well, what is your situation with jockeys at the moment? And obviously, if you just mentioned the guys that are there. Well,
Oisin Orr, we don't have a retained jockey since Pat. So, Oisin Orr is riding a lot of our horses. I'm very pleased with Oisin. He and Andy Slattery, they were joint champion apprentice champions last year, both riding here. And Oisin will be kind of riding the main Chris Hayes rides for us. I've used some of the other good apprentices as well in the handicaps. But by and large, Oisin Orr has been riding most of them.
A laid-back character.
He is, and very talented. He's been twice champion apprentice in a 3-year period, and has he's a heavy guy. He rides just under 9 stone. But he's very talented, obviously, by his success. He's a Donegal man. And I got him a job with Chris Waller in Australia last winter. And he had an amazing strike rate. And he's invited back to ride for Chris Waller, who's the leading trainer there this winter, if he wishes to go.
Lovely.
And you've obviously got strong chances for a number of horses. A great team of runners at the weekend for the Longines Irish Champions weekend. Search for a Song, looking for back-to-back in the Comer Group Irish St. Ledger.
Yeah, she's our main runner. At the weekend, I'd have to say, it's a race that's been fortunate for me. I think we've won it 7 times. So, she's our main runner at the weekend, and she's in great form. And look, we'd be hoping for a very good run from her.
I remember you were saying she was, I think the first time I interviewed you after she won her maiden, you said she was claustrophobic at the time. Is she still a little bit mentally tricky?
Yeah, she is. That's the challenge. She's a very talented lady, but she has her moments. And but she is claustrophobic. She's less claustrophobic than she used to be, but she is still slightly claustrophobic. I suppose, like many humans that experience that phenomena, you learn to live with it.
What about your other runners this weekend then? Sorry, Jerry, you've obviously some nice 2-year-olds as well.
Yeah, we don't have that many runners now, probably than you'd like me to have, but we've only 3 runners at Leopardstown. Blue for You is a horse that won for me in Galway, his 2-year-old maiden. He's gone in the deep end. He's drawn 9 of the 10 in the Champion Juvenile Stakes. He'd probably like a lot more ease in the ground, but he's a nice colt and he'll run respectable race. If he could be 3rd, I'd be delighted. I run a nice 2-year-old filly called Vario in the first. Again, she's the only filly in the race that hasn't run. So I just thought it'd be nice ground at Leopardstown. I am putting her in the deep end a little bit, but if she could be placed, we'd be delighted.
Yeah, you've obviously Amar Cherise.
Yeah, Amar Cherise then goes from the Moy Glare. Obviously belonged to Moy Glare. She's a nice filly. She has to step up. She won at the Curragh, then she was group placed. She's got to improve off her last run if she's going to win. But again, I could see her having a place chance. What
chance would you give the likes of Zawara and Tarnawa?
Tarnawa goes to Longchamp to run in the Prix Vermeil. Mm-hmm. And that'll be Christophe Soumian rides her. She's very well Tarnawa. She's won 4 group races for me. And 3 Group 3s and a Group 2. Now she goes up to Group 1, but it's a very, very high-class Group 1. We've got the Irish Oaks winner in it.
Yeah.
And Laburnum represents Ballydoyle. And so they're the 3 Irish runners there in the Group 1 in France on Sunday. And, we've got the best fillies in France to take on.
Well, listen, have a great weekend. It's such an important weekend for Irish racing, and it's been a long time coming. And continued success, Dermot. Great to talk to you. Thanks a million.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
It was a lovely chat there with Dermot Weld. A reminder, of course, Friday Night Racing and Off the Ball, brought to you by Horse Racing Ireland. Love every racing moment. Visit hri.ie. You can follow the Twitter account at HRI Racing, and the hashtag is every racing moment. I think probably we take for granted sometimes just how amazing some of these trainers are and the body of work that they've put together, Johnny. But that whole notion of being just wild enough to go, I'm going to Australia and I'm going to win their biggest race and I'm going to do it twice.
It's absolutely phenomenal, and he was a game changer, really. You look at Ireland had the first 3 home in the Melbourne Cup. I think it was Tony Martin, Willie Mullins, and Joseph. I think if I get that right.
No, you're right, yeah.
And Joseph himself is now kind of maybe changing the racing that he won it with a 3-year-old, and but Dermot to do that, and to think of his father, like I'm only speculating what Ireland was like in the 60s, but I mean, obviously they were people of means that were maybe more so than your average Joe, but at the same time, to bring horses over to America, and you kind of have to justify that to do that. You have to be aware of your opposition. You have to be aware of the pitfalls. This is a horse going to another continent, to a different climate. He has to adjust, and Dermot would have been a complete game changer and no doubt a genius, really. And his longevity is probably not that unusual in racing. In terms of the characters we have who they live very healthy lives. They're outdoors. A lot of them don't smoke. A lot of them don't drink. They live healthy lives. They're around horses. They get fresh air. They work hard and they live long and they don't regress. And the racing is great in that regard. It's a country for all men. It's a country for all women. And Dermot Weld is a long way from finished. And that's the beauty of it. And he's a true Irish sporting legend, no doubt whatsoever about that.
I like the bit that they're floating on this bed of limestone, which is this kind of miracle that allows the grass to taste and grow and be so full of minerals that we're getting the best horses in the world out of it. And it actually is all to do with the bog, which I'm telling you, most of us in Kildare driving across that bog, we're cursing that bog a lot.
I know all about bogs, yeah.
Very thin roads. And the trip from Athy to Kildare was no crack, especially those dark winter nights.
Yeah, it's all right having, I suppose, one road like in East Galway and on the way into the Midlands. From my house to Glenamaddy, from my house to Ballygar, from my house even to Mount Bellew, there's a lot of bog, and I can well attest to the road sinking in front of you. But there's so many aspects of training horses. Like he's talking about the land and all that. It's no coincidence, obviously, that these. The likes of the Meath and Kildare region, there's so many of the best horses in the world come out of, and then like you see the land in Ballydoyle and all that, the Golden Vale of Tipperary and Cork and all that, and that almost certainly stands to us in terms of our great horsemen and women that we do have. But everything is in place in this country, and we shouldn't take that for granted. And in fairness, today with obviously the news that Shane Cross has tested positive for the coronavirus, it's another thing we can't take for granted, that this thing has not gone away. And I think this news only came in today, and he's a jockey, obviously rides for Joseph O'Brien, and the reaction of Irish racing has been really, really proactive. It's been straight away, let's deal with this, let's trace who he's been with, and we shouldn't take that for granted either, that we're still racing away, because you never know what's going to happen at the moment.
No, there is no certainty for sure. The Tote Irish Injured Jockeys Fund remains at €2,090. Last week's pick, Famous Escape, was a lucky 13th place at Ballinrobe on Sunday.
Yeah, it ran very poorly. Rachel Blackmore riding it was weak in the betting. I sometimes can't explain why horses run as badly as that when they ran so well the two times before that, but the market was very worrying. So we have to go back to the drawing board this weekend, Ger.
Can Johnny find a Longines Irish Champions weekend winner for our latest €100 Tote bet? Tote customers can now enjoy betting through tote.ie, the new home of Irish pool betting. Log on to tote.ie to find out more.
Yeah, I've a Racing TV tipping column, which if you've been following it for the last few months, you wouldn't be broke, you'd actually be heavily in debt. But this weekend at Leopardstown, I actually think there's a great book of bets there. If you want to do like a lucky 15, lucky 31, racing starts at 2 o'clock to 5:50. So it's a nice way to spend the afternoon, whether you're watching maybe in a bar or watching at home or watching wherever. But you can definitely, there's five or six bets you can have there. My best one is Fernando Vici. I backed him at 66-1 for the Derby next year, but he's running in the Champion Juvenile Stakes, trained by Dunica. I was up at Dunica's yard in Cashel recently. He loves this horse. He doesn't do an awful lot at home, the horse that is, and he's kind of one you have to half judge how well he is. But I think he's one of these horses that once you give him a squeeze, there isn't an instant reaction, but once he gets going, it's like bang bang. And I backed him. I think he's a great chance, and he's an each way price at the moment. If you go to,
you backed him for the Derby next year as well.
Yeah, so he's a horse by Australia who's obviously won the Derby, and Dunica's ridden in the Derby. He sort of knows. He's very young training, but it wouldn't worry me at all. He says maybe it's a little bit ambitious. I don't really like Aiden's 2-year-olds this year, and I don't think any of them has set the world alight. It's interesting looking at this race that considering that it would be a traditional Derby trial. Aiden has one runner in the whole race, and that runner is by American Pharaoh, who would not be a Derby sire, or certainly would. It's obviously you're thinking Galileo. He just doesn't. He's the favourite for the Derby next year is by Warfront, which would be unusual. So I don't think Aiden is an outstanding Derby horse, or at least he hasn't shown him yet. and I think his son might have, and he's 66-1 for the race. And I'm entitled to dream, and hopefully dream a bit more if he wins the 340, which is a Group 2 race.
Okay, so 340 on Saturday?
Yeah.
And what kind of, you said an each way price, what does that mean?
Yeah, it's 6-1, 13-2. You can get 6-1 with one of the Irish bookmakers that has a shop. So I presume they lay a bet with it being the weekend that it is.
Okay, right. Competition time here. Coolmore Stud, sponsor of the Group 1 Coolmore America Justify Matron Stakes on day one of the Longines Irish Champions weekend tomorrow at Leopardstown Racecourse, have given us a pretty special prize for 4 guests. Win a trip to the world famous Coolmore Stud for you and 3 guests, followed by lunch at the stud. Then enjoy a trip to Feathered Horse Country Experience Museum, followed by dinner in Mikey Ryan's Bar and Kitchen in Cashel. To win, name any of the stallions standing at Coolmore Stud in Tipperary. You can text your name and answer 53106 for 30 cent, and we'll contact you after the show. That's if you're listening to us on the radio this evening, or you can WhatsApp us now, 0879 180 180. Have you any other tips for us? Anything else that you like?
Well, obviously, like Dermot having having Brett Gayet, I'm sure he's a little bit annoyed that they're not training the beast, because he is outstanding favourite for the Champion Stakes, and likely he will win. I'm sure he's one for your accumulators. I'll just list you actually the horses that I tipped tomorrow. Kasparenko is running in one of the earlier races. That's trained by Ken Condon. He's good form in England, and his last run at Leopardstown was very eye-catching. He would certainly come into it for me. He's 33-1 at the moment. And there's the last race as well at Leopardstown. Jessica Harrington has an interesting run on that. It actually ran in the race last year. It was trained by Jim Bulger. Was scratched from Punchdown recently. I think that might have been ground related. That's by Pedro. Up Helia for Willie McCreary, your fellow Kildare man, fellow Kildare GA fan. The Dam actually won the Matron at Leopardstown, probably the best horse that Aussie Rule produced. I also like, that's Up Helia. I also like Sinawan Albina for Jessica Harrington, another Kildare legend. I think this horse is a massive each-way chance in the Matron, the aforementioned Matron. Forget about her last run. And then on Sunday's a bit trickier, but there are lots of each-way kind of Yankees, each-way lucky 63s tomorrow, and brilliant racing. And if you're not there, you can certainly enjoy it almost as much, because it is cracking racing, and great, as I said, Jared, to see overseas runners. Yeah,
100%. Johnny, so just to remind everybody of your tip, it's the 340 tomorrow.
Fernando Vici, yeah, for Donncha O'Brien and Gavin Ryan.
Yeah, I noticed that anytime you go to visit, you fall in love with the horse. Your picture on WhatsApp changes, and you get a bit of Stockholm syndrome, and you end up tipping these horses immediately afterwards.
There is a bit of that, all right. I mean, that's not a sound manner in which to say this horse is a good bet next time. But I don't think I'm not even sure I met Fernando Vici. I did meet Fancy Blue, who's like, she's favourite for the Matron, and Donncha's like, some days she's very nice. Some days she's an absolute boss. Like, so this is the thing. Like, if you were compelled, like we were back in the day, if the school said to you, you have to go to the Gaeltacht for a couple of weeks just to, to learn your Irish and to, grow up as a person and all that. If you were sent to a racing yard after a week, you'd fall in love with the horses, and like, this lad has a bit of character about him. God, he doesn't want to do anything. This lad eats up all the time. This lad's really lazy. This lad nearly had a go at me. And this one is Fancy Blue, and she's a madam. Like, she is the boss. And he does like Fernando Vici. Fernando Vici would be a very laid back character. He's just like, I'll do what's enough, and hopefully enough is enough in the 340 tomorrow. All
right, for the week that's in it, we've put together a classic of the genre. Another Friday Night Racing is in the books. Friday Night Racing is brought to you by Horse Racing Ireland. Johnny, good stuff. We'll see you next week.
Have a great weekend, Jer.
And remember, we're live every Friday afternoon from 3 o'clock on otbsports.com, or indeed on the OTB Sports app, which is available to download for free in the App Store. And then we're live every Friday evening from 8 o'clock on Off the Ball on News Talk. See you next week.
Friday Night Racing
on Off the Ball.
Brought to you by Horse Racing Ireland. Love every racing moment. Visit hri.ie.